everybody, my name's Elaine, and today I'm going to be ranking the top 10 worst Discworld novels by Terry Pratchett. I'm just going to jump right into things with number 10, which is Going Postal. Obviously, was not a fan of this novel. First, I thought it strange that this novel had both a Chapter 7 and a Chapter 7a, but not a Chapter 8. Pratchett just skipped ahead to Chapter 9. Furthermore, the notes beneath the chapter and its title gave away some of what happens. I would have preferred those notes or headings, whatever you would like to call them, were not included to allow me to be more surprised by the plot's progression. I also felt as though this was a particularly slow Discworld novel, although it picked up at the end, which really helped rescue the plot. Furthermore, it wasn't as funny as some of the other Discworld novels which came before it. In addition, many of the characters were easy to like Moist, the reluctant hero forced into attempting to redeem himself after a life of crime, while others, like Gilt, the lying crook, were not. Some of them were just plain peculiar. Examples would include Grote, who was just a little too obsessed with his job at the Post, and Stanley, who was just a little too obsessed with pins for a large portion of the novel. I mean, pins? Really? I thought Gilt's name was interesting, though. It's a really good play on words, since Gilt means to be covered thinly with gold leaf or gold paint, suggesting that his character isn't as good as it seems, and he lacks the value he portrays. Furthermore, Gilt sounds like guilt, which can be short for guilty. Being that he's the main antagonist and to blame for most of the problems described in the novel, I felt as though his name was rather apt. Coming in at number 9 is Moving Pictures. I felt as though Moving Pictures had its moments where the action was fast-paced and entertaining and the humor was spot on, but there were far too many lulls for me to enjoy this novel as much as some of those that came earlier in the series and definitely most of those that came later. I felt like the novel was often redundant, repeating similar thoughts and ideas, often without building on them. Examples included the fact that no one seemed to know why they headed to Holywood, or that you only got one chance in Holywood. This, in part, contributed to the lulls within the novel's plot and progression. I felt like Pratchett threw too many tiny details into his explanations of the plot, which made it harder to follow and appreciate. An example would be that Ginger was descended from the original High Priestess who oversaw the temple under Holywood Hill. The priestess's memories filtered into her mind in dreams, propelling her to try and stop the things from getting out. Although creative, it was oddly worded and confusing. I had to read the passage a few times to make sure I understood it and would have preferred something a little more straightforward in this instance and several others. To some degree, my next point builds off my last. The novel seemed very spontaneous, like it wasn't planned out particularly well. There were so many different things going on that it was sometimes hard to follow. The fact that Pratchett kept referring to the same thing with different words also made it hard to follow at times. For example, the hill is the gate or the door. I didn't find Victor or Ginger to be compelling leads either. Ginger was snooty, obnoxious, and self-absorbed. She wasn't someone who it's easy to like. Victor seemed like he was just going through the motions of solving a mystery and being a hero. I would have liked it if he had a clearer personality and traits that bled through the novel. The beginning of the novel described him as being lazy and having tried several jobs. I wouldn't describe saving the world as lazy or trying to solve Holywood's mystery, feeling the drive to do so as lazy. I wouldn't call it character development either, since it's so sudden. It just doesn't feel like there was time for Victor to develop into the driven individual he becomes as the novel progresses. 8th on my list was Making Money. Definitely didn't enjoy this one. It's towards the bottom of my list, so it's not as bad as some things though. I felt as though this one overstayed its welcome. It dragged on, and I just wished it would end already. It was hard to keep reading and turning the pages, and honestly felt like a drag all around. I also wasn't pleased to see Moist again. He's not a character I enjoy. He's as forgettable as his appearance, but more respectable in this novel than the previous he appeared in, which is Going Postal. I feel as though this makes him an even blander character, but it was interesting to see him use his talents he acquired as a con man, and during his period of moral growth at the post office to his advantage to help both the bank and the mint. In addition to his character, I'm not fond of his name, Moist. It's a cringe-inducing word, at least for me, evocative of damp hands, clammy handshakes, shudder. With that being said, it was interesting to see Moist get roped into taking another job, the same job, that of taking control of the Royal Mint, as Mr. Gilt was offered at the end of Going Postal. Number 7 was The Fifth Elephant. When I first started reading this novel again, I felt a little overwhelmed and frustrated by all of the different plot lines. There was unrest in the dwarf community because of the newly elected Loking and all of the political drama surrounding that, the murder of Sankey, the theft of the scone, and another handful of murders came shortly thereafter. It felt like too much, and I was frustrated because I don't feel as though Vimes or his underlings need to solve a murder mystery in every book he's in. Theft is fine, excessive parking tickets, some sort of illegal underground ring of trade. There are a million things a policeman could be dealing with that don't involve murder. Then Vimes arrives in Uberwald and more murders take place, but the original murderers are more or less forgotten. The dwarves' affairs in Uberwald's unstable social environment take over, and then suddenly, toward the end of the novel, all of the murders are rapidly solved and all of the puzzle pieces come together. I've mentioned this before in other Discworld novels and reviews. Sometimes it feels like Pratchett drops a few threads, be it in the form of plot or character, suddenly remembers that he has done so, picks it up again, wraps things up extremely abruptly, and it's rather jarring. If there was more of a continual thread throughout, I think I would have been happier when it came to the plot's composition, even though I'm beyond over the murder mystery aspect of Vimes' novels. I also felt as though this novel's plot suffered from several slow patches, and I would have loved if things were sped up just a little. It had some really entertaining and humorous moments, however, which I appreciated. I also wasn't particularly fond of any of the new characters Pratchett introduced in this novel, with perhaps the exception of Gavin. Wolfgang was a prime example. His desire to keep his bloodline strong and destroy anything he deemed impure or unworthy reminded me a lot of the unsavory individuals who arose during World War II. Portions of the novel he was involved in weren't easy to read from the standpoint of one's comfort, and his descent into an even deeper state of madness, which took place toward the end of the novel when he can be seen going on a crazed murderous rampage, certainly didn't help matters. Finally, I felt as though the werewolves' motivations weren't as clear as they could have been. We know that they worked with some dwarves in order to incite a war between traditional and progressive dwarves, but I feel as though Pratchett failed to go the extra mile and explain their motivations for helping them. We know that the werewolves want to keep Uberwald separate, but we're never really told why that is, specifically, and are forced to work it out based off context. Essentially, the werewolves want Uberwald to remain divided, essentially feudal, because it provides them with the most power. Number 6 on my list was Small Gods. This novel had a lot going on. For me, it was a lot harder to follow than many of the novels which came earlier on in the Discworld series, and even some that came after it in the series. I always felt like I was missing a little something, or a little bit of something. The novel also included a few peculiar points, some of which I didn't mention in my summary if you listen to that. An example would be a meeting that didn't really take place between the meeting parties. It was meant to push the plot forward, but I simply found it confusing, and it contributed to my sense that the novel was spontaneous and disorganized. The novel also contained details which simply didn't make sense. For example, Brotha and followed the tracks left by soldiers through the desert, but the desert was windy. How did the prince remain intact? Why weren't they blown over with sand? I felt as though many of the novel's characters were bland. A prime example would be who, for the most part, can only be described as bossy. He also doesn't grow much during the course of the novel. I would have liked to see more from and the other characters featured in Small Gods. I felt as though the novel was often redundant. For example, it mentioned that tortoises make for good eating frequently, and I wasn't the biggest fan of all the philosophical and religious discussions which appeared in this book. It's just not my kind of thing. Coming in at number 5 was Masquerade, which was basically the Phantom of the Opera without the music, which is honestly the best part. I've never been a fan of the story, but I really enjoy the music. With that being said, I enjoyed how Pratchett changed the story up a little. There was far less emphasis on both romance and the Phantom's romantic obsession with Christine in this novel, which I appreciated. Furthermore, there were two ghosts, Walter, who simply wanted to enjoy the opera and lend a helping hand by giving pointers and supporting the opera, and an evil ghost, Salzella, who stole from the opera and killed people who got too nosy or tried to blackmail him. I wasn't particularly fond of some of the new characters Pratchett introduced. A prime example would be Christine. She's a total and complete airhead. There's absolutely nothing going on upstairs, and her memory is terrible. It was honestly painful to read her brief excursions onto the page. I also felt as though the phrase, "but the show must go on," was horribly overused. However, I appreciated the fact that the novel was pretty light and fast-paced and easy to read, and it was also a good length, not too short and not too long. Coming in at number 4 was I Shall Wear Midnight. I really do not like this book for several different reasons. First, I felt as though it was pretty dark and did not feel like a YA novel. It also didn't feel like a Tiffany Aching novel. The other novels in the Tiffany Aching series up until this point have been light and fun. This novel was filled with darkness and depression, more difficult topics like abuse and a steady stream of deaths. This is not something that has come up in the Tiffany Aching novels previously and contributed most to my dislike of it. Discworld novels for me are novels that are funny and satirical and playful. This novel was none of those things, and it didn't put me in a better mood when I was done reading it. Furthermore, the Tiffany Aching books were the ones that first got me into the Discworld series. I started with the We Free Men and made my way along Tiffany's story, but if I had started out of order with this novel, I can promise you I would never have picked up another Discworld novel. This book was depressing and dragged on for far too long. I also really didn't understand the point of Amber's character. It seemed like Pratchett was building her up to be extremely important to the plot, perhaps someone that helped Tiffany defeat the Cunning Man. But after her many excursions onto the page in the first half of the novel, there really wasn't anything involving her until the very end, and Amber was not a part of the time in which Tiffany finally overcame the Cunning Man. She really didn't do anything, so I'm left confused. Did Pratchett originally have other plans for her and then abandon them in favor of what we saw in the book? Was he building her up to be used in later novels, at which point, why not just stick her in them? I'm not really sure what happened here, and I'm a little confused. With that being said, I've always felt like Tiffany was a very relatable character, and that hasn't changed in this novel. She struggles with a sense of otherness, being apart because of her status as a witch. I think this is something that most people have contended with at some point in their lives, perhaps because her family is less affluent than the others in their neighborhood or something of that nature. So it was good to see Tiffany's relatability continued in this novel. Coming in at number 3 was Soul Music. And this is here because I felt like it was often slow and I really don't enjoy the subject matter. It just wasn't exciting. There were also a lot of typos which detracted from the flow of the prose and made the novel feel even longer. Furthermore, Mr. Cleet's laugh was really annoying. Hat hat hat. This book also raised a few important questions. First, if Liam has diamond teeth, why didn't he use one to pay for entry into the Guild of Musicians? He used one to pay for the instruments and sheet music at the shop and to repair Buddy's harp. It just doesn't make any sense. Second, why didn't Albert recognize Susan immediately? She has very distinctive features like pure white hair with a black streak. Even with the time that has passed since he last saw her, it just doesn't make sense. Third, why did Albert bring his lifetimer with him when he left Death's estate? He knew how much time he had left, and it seems like a good way to ensure the thing gets broken. At least, the odds are increasing in a way that doesn't favor the old wizard. I also felt as though the novel contained a few inconsistencies. On page 10, the old musical instrument shop appears in Ankh-Morpork. No one remarked on its arrival. As soon as it appeared, it had always been there. But on page 26, Colin questions its presence. Yes, was it there for years yesterday? It's as though the magic surrounding the shop can be broken by certain people, and it makes me wonder what the rules regarding this occurrence are. Coming in at number 2 is Hogfather. I was really dreading the moment when I would have to reread this book. I really didn't enjoy it the first time around, and I can't say that I enjoyed it any more the second time around. The novel is painfully slow. It's also one of Pratchett's darker works, similar to I Shall Wear Midnight, so I didn't find it as light or humorous as many of his other novels, and it definitely didn't put me in a good mood after I was done reading it like most of his other novels. I didn't find the premise to be very intriguing. I really didn't see the point in the wizard's subplot with the bathroom. It didn't do anything other than slow down the plot's progression even further. Although it was humorous, there were a lot of things which just didn't seem to have a point or make much sense, like the children's drawing of a house was also the Tooth Fairy's tower. What? All in all, I felt like it was a poor novel, definitely amongst my least favorites in the entire Discworld series, and read seriously just for the sake of continuity, and I think you could tell because it's number 2 on my list. And now, without much further ado, on to the book that tops my list, the number 1 spot, the worst Discworld novel in my humble opinion, Raising Steam. I'm going to keep this one short and sweet, unlike this novel, which I obviously really don't like. It felt as though it was too long and too slow, and the subject matter was exceedingly boring, which made it even worse. I also wasn't particularly fond of the main characters in this novel, especially Mr. Moist, or their supporting characters. And there you have it, my ranking of the top 10 worst Discworld novels by Terry Pratchett. As you could tell, most of the things I don't like have issues with, the prose itself, pacing, poor characters, and just plots that just aren't intriguing. So, what do you think? Were those good reasons not to like these books? Which Discworld novels don't you like and why? Let me know down below in the comments. I always like to know what you guys think. And if you like what you saw here today, please smash that like button until it's blue, subscribe, ring that bell so you'll know what's up, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye, guys!